everyone. I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One on One. On this week's episode, the attack at Pearl Harbor from the eyes of a man who was there. Bud Hollenbeck is believed to be the only remaining Pearl Harbor survivor in the Wilmington area. Bud was stationed on the USS Pennsylvania battleship on that fateful morning, Sunday, December 7th, 1941. But the Pennsylvania was not located in what's called Battleship Row, where the USS Oklahoma and the USS Arizona were attacked. It was across the harbor, about 3/4 of a mile away in what's called dry dock, undergoing some repairs. Bud Hollenbeck is now 97 years old, and he reads his memories that he has jotted down over the years about that day. He also uses language that was accepted back then that is more frowned upon now. First off, Mr. Hollenbeck, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk to me about this.
I like to talk, you know that.
How did you go about getting into the military? Were you drafted? Did you sign up?
No, I graduated from high school and there were no jobs. So just decided all I wanted to do was get in the Navy. So they said, yeah, okay, but you got to be perfect. Your system and everything has to be perfect. So I had to get 2 teeth drilled a little bit. That was all. And they were happy with that. And then when I got in there on October the 8th, they said, well, it was 4 years, but now it's 6 years. So being as young as you are, you say, what's another 2 years?
Right.
So, yeah.
And why did you pick the Navy?
Because I'm interested in the ocean and so forth. No, I lived on the Cape Cod for a while, yeah. When I was real young, probably 2.5 to 5 years old. And they never told me, you know, I had to figure it out later on. My mother never told me all the details. Actually, I was born in Cooperstown, New York.
Home of the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, but we had a farm and for milk cows. And then the cost of milk went, so we lost the farm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Then we headed back to the Boston area. Why there, I'm not sure. Except my mother did grow up in Hyde Park. Yeah, she did. My father was born on Cape Cod, and how he learned to swim, they threw him in the Cape Cod Canal one time, the group that he was playing with. Oh, well. So he had to learn to swim.
Good thing they were friends. I hate to see if they didn't like him, what they would have done to him. Yeah. So you enlist into the Navy, and you told me that you got onto the USS Pennsylvania a year before Pearl Harbor, correct?
Yeah. Actually, December the 2nd. I looked it up recently. December the 2nd it was, yeah, on 1940. Yeah.
And where did you go on the Pennsylvania before fate put you in dry dock on that morning?
Well, it was in Washington, you know, and being worked on when I went aboard. And the first thing they had me do was go down into the below decks where the ammunition was put, and they were ripping out all the insulation and so forth to put in some new, probably fiberglass is what they probably put in, but it was cork that we had in there. So all they said to me was, well, you go down there, the Yardbirds are tearing it off, you haul it out to the deck, onto the dock. Mm-hmm. But you're going up a lot of, you know, climbing ladders, right, to get there. Yeah.
And you were a signalman. What were the responsibilities?
Well, I didn't get to be until the middle of 41, yeah, the middle of 41 when I got up on the bridge. And the Pennsylvania was put in service on the 16th of, yeah, and it couldn't go over to the #1 battle stuff over in Europe because the Arizona and the Pennsylvania are sister ships, and we were the first ones to have fuel oil instead of coal, so we couldn't go over there because there were nothing to give us fuel.
Can you take me to the morning of December 7th? Where were you? I imagine it started like every other morning?
Let me have that, because I got it written.
Okay.
Yeah. The USS Pennsylvania, BB-38, flagship of the U.S. fleet, was in #1 dry dock in Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December, 1941, having entered the dry dock on Saturday, December 6th. I had awakened about 6:30 a.m., washed, dressed, and had breakfast. It was about 7:45 when I arrived on the signal bridge to assume the 8 to 12 watch. Tony Crudelli was my watch supervisor, and it was a beautiful Hawaiian day, sunny and warm with a few clouds over the mountains. And the mountains were on the north side, you know. The watch personnel who had just been relieved had gone below to have breakfast. My watch station was on the port wing of the signal bridge, and I was hoisting the prep flag at 7:55 a.m. when I noticed a long string of planes coming in over the north end of Ford Island. I thought they were our planes, making a surprise practice run. A few seconds later, I heard a loud whomp, and then another. And I went over to the starboard wing of the bridge in time to see pieces of the PBY, amphibious patrol plane, flying through the air at the south end of Ford Island. It was then that I looked at the insignias on the wings of the planes, big red meatballs. They were Japanese Navy planes. Tony phoned to the officer of the deck to let him know what we were seeing from our vantage point on the signal bridge. Part of our normal duties performed on the signal bridge was to act as lookouts to keep the officer of the deck informed of activities of interest in the areas within our view. The signal bridge was some 35 feet above the ship's quarterdeck, where the officer of the deck was stationed while the ship was in port. I should explain the use of the prep flag. At Pearl Harbor, the base signal bridge was located on the yard water tower. Yeah. The prep flag was hoisted at the yard on the yard tower at 7:55 a.m. every morning, and all the ships of Pearl would follow the tower's lead and hoist prep flags at their yard arms. And then at exactly 8 a.m., the prep flag on the tower would be hauled down, followed immediately by all the ships in Pearl. Colors, the U.S. flag, would then be hoisted. The band was assembled on the quarterdeck, waiting for the prep flag to be executed so they could play the national anthem. See, the battleships had music, put it that way, yeah. The yard signal tower hauled down the prep flag at 8 a.m., and we followed. The band did not get to play, for they were headed for their general quarters stations. By this time, planes were all over the place, and Tony sent two of us into the conning tower, that being 16 inches of steel, for protection, since he did not need us on the bridge. See, we were new at it. We were learning to be signalmen.
So you went into basically a tower that protected you from what was going on.
Right. While climbing through the conning tower doorway, I felt a sharp pain in my right wrist. It was a small puncture wound, and it did not bother me. Several weeks later, a small piece of lead worked its way out, and where I think that came from. I was 19 years old, and I do not recall being scared. At one point, we went out to the starboard wing to see the USS Nevada get underway. And she got underway on her own without help. And they gave her hell for that later on, because they weren't supposed to do that thing.
Right, but I mean, I would imagine that crew was probably just trying to escape what was happening.
Yeah. At one point, we went out to the starboard wing to see the U.S. Nevada underway. The Japanese pilots saw her too and concentrated their dive bombers on her. At that time, those dive bombers were heading toward dry dock number 1, where we were. The Pennsylvania, Cassin, and the Downs were docked.
The 3 ships were right there.
Yes. By presenting an underway target, Nevada probably saved us from more damage. The Jap planes made several bomb hits in the area of the Nevada's forecastle. The resulting smoke was so thick that the bridge personnel could not see, and the ship touched land near where the destroyer Shaw was docked. Now, that was a dry dock that was up on the rails, not.
So they had taken it actually up and out of the water.
Yeah, yeah. The Japs wanted to sink her in the channel to block shipping. However, the Nevada backed off with the help of a yard tugboat and nosed into land out of the channel. We returned to our conning tower. The second wave of the Jap planes, dive and high-level bombers, concentrated on the dry dock area, which the Pennsylvania, Cassin, and Downs occupied. The Pennsy was hit by a 500-pound armor-piercing bomb. It was just like the bomb that hit the Arizona, which penetrated the 6-inch armored deck and exploded in the powder magazine. And there were 1,100 of the crew,
right,
causing the catastrophic explosion that resulted in the deaths of 1,100 of its crew. The Pennsy was lucky, for the bomb hit a broadside gun mount, causing it to explode before it could penetrate the 6 armored deck. It caused the deaths of 24 of our crew. Another thought brings this to mind. If the bomb had hit just 1 or 2 feet from where it did, we probably would have had the same fate as the Arizona. Yeah.
So just basically...
No one else has ever said anything like that about it, that bomb that hit us.
2 or 3 feet may have made the difference in you surviving that day and not surviving that day.
Right. Yeah, if it had gone straight through, I wouldn't be here.
When you think of that, how does that play in your mind?
Well, you didn't think of that right away, This is something I thought about later on, thinking about it, and so forth. That's why I wrote it this way.
Yeah.
It was a thought that I didn't know anybody else thought about it or printed it or anything. Mm-hmm. But I printed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. The Cassin and the Downs took several hits, and at one point at least one of their torpedoes exploded. We were watching the destroyers through the small ports in the conning tower, and the concussion threw both of us back against the opposite side, but we were not hurt.
Do you remember that feeling?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You ever been hit that hard since?
No. The slits that were there were only about this big, about like that we were looking through, to see. Oh, yeah. The crew of the Pennsy owe thanks to the crane operator of that large dockside crane. All during the attack, he ran the crane back and forth along the tracks while rotating the boom around, which helped to keep the strafing planes at a higher altitude. But while we benefited, the cast of the Downs took the brunt of the attacks because they were open, you know. At some point during the attack, the dry dock was flooded to help keep the ships, the three of us, from being knocked off our support blocks. The oil from the damaged destroyer spread on the water and caught on fire. One of our signalmen, Bob Raines, who been talking to him over the years. He's up in the state of Washington.
Right.
He's got a nice place up there, a place that he had returned to the ship late the night before and was sleeping on a cot in the covered part of the bridge. And so, shortly after the attack had begun, he came bounding out of his sack asking why we had not awakened him. In the thin metal shield beside his cot was a spent bullet. About a foot above the cot. That was probably the source of the piece of lead that hit me in my wrist. Because see, the vent was over there, and I had my hand up here over on the thing. So it could have gone from there.
So literally, it missed him by inches in the cot.
Well, about a foot.
About a foot. And then a piece of whatever it hit came and hit you in the wrist.
Yeah. Didn't hit a blood or anything. And knowing that everybody else had been hurt and everything else, I wasn't going to report it. A little.
Right.
They had enough problems without me. In anticipation of further attacks, all weapons available in Pearl were manned while rescue operations were going on. Toward evening, several of our carrier planes flew in to land at Ford Island. They were from one of our carriers, which was returning from a trip to Wake or Midway. I don't remember which one it was. And even though the word had been passed that we were expecting some of our carrier planes, someone with a nervous trigger finger opened up with a machine gun. And then just about every gun in the Pearl commenced firing at the incoming aircraft. And most of the planes went down. I don't know whether any were killed, but the planes went down. Mm-hmm. Just a little bit, I'm almost through.
No, you take your time.
I do not remember many details of the next 2 weeks. However, the dry dock was pumped out and cleaned enough to reinstall the Pensy's screws. The bomb damage was partly repaired, and we sailed from Pearl Harbor 2 weeks after the attack. Christmas was spent at sea, and on December 29th, we steamed into San Francisco Bay. Berth Baker 3, and that's what we left. Pearl Harbor was Berth Baker 3 when we left there. Rather odd. But there was concern that the Japs would attack the West Coast, and the Pennsy was assigned to help protect it, as well as all the older battleships as they come out, went in, as you can see when you saw it on the Admiral Pye was in charge of the group there.
Can you tell me, you were actually hoisting the flag at the time?
Yes.
And you said you remember not having time to be afraid.
Yeah.
Do you remember what went through your mind as you were seeing, as you looked and turned and looked at the Arizona and everything else like that and everything that was happening?
Well, you're just seeing a lot of stuff happening, and you can't do anything about it. So, later on, after the war, we had the crew of the Pennsylvania got together, on a yearly basis.
Sure.
And one of the fellows, one of our signalmen, yeah, was there at that one. I hadn't seen him in quite a while. And he told me what happened to him when the bomb hit down there, because it hit some fairly close to our compartment in there. And he explained to me why he didn't want to go swimming or anything else, because he got knocked down on the deck and something held him down to the deck while the water pipe was burst and was putting water, you know, getting one compartment to the other. You got to step up and over into the next compartment. So he was lying down there, and it was coming up here on him. Finally, somebody found him, and he remembers that. So he says, I don't go swimming or anything after that one.
I can imagine how he thought about that day. Did you have the chance that day to man any guns and do any firing that day?
No, we wouldn't have anything to do with the guns. You know. No. No. But later on, they put enough guns on it to shoot at airplanes. Yeah. A couple times, you know, during the war and so forth.
How close were the planes actually coming to where you were?
They were not that close. The one that hit us there was from a high altitude, the second group that came in, you know. And I didn't see any. The crane kept them away from us with their machine guns, you know, from the planes. Oh, one of our officers was killed with a machine gun, from a machine gun, yeah.
From one of the planes?
He was climbing up the aft mast, up the ladder there when they got him, yeah.
You said you don't remember much about the next 2 weeks after that?
Yeah.
What is one of the first things you remember after that?
Getting underway and going. They didn't tell us where we were going, you know, so. And we're heading out and so forth, and the other ships and so forth were waving to us and so forth, you know.
As you were leaving,
yeah.
Could you see the damage to all of the other ships?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
What did you think at that time?
Well, I don't recall any real thoughts, you know.
Was there a feeling of being blessed that you had survived?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
If somebody would see the movie Pearl Harbor, or somebody would see a documentary on it, does that paint any kind of picture as to how it was, or is that just a memory that you and several other thousand people have because you were there that day?
I think it's pretty much that way, yeah. Just those that were there have their memories of what happened to them, you know. We didn't talk about it when we had our yearly get-together. We didn't talk. No. Didn't talk much about the battle.
And why do you think that? Why wouldn't people talk about it? They didn't want to think about it?
Well, we enjoyed getting together, so forth, you know, and doing a few things, you know, and getting together. So that's what we kind of concentrated on, yeah. We didn't talk about it.
When people asked you about it in the years afterwards, was it difficult to talk about? Maybe in 1950 or 55? Was it?
No.
No?
Not difficult, no. No. The memory is pretty good on what happened then, except for that 2 weeks before we got underway. Oh, I got back there. My boy was out there to Hickam Field after the war, and so he invited us, my wife and I, to come out and stay with him for a few days.
Did you go back to the harbor itself to see the way it looked? And what memories did that bring back?
Well, they were still using the dry dock. That was done in '03, I guess, when it was new. And it was all plastered up and everything up, patched up here and there and everything. And they were working on the submarines when we got there.
Did you go to the memorial for the Arizona?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was out there a few times, you know, on the 7th. Yeah.
Was that difficult in any way? Was that tough?
No, not really, because you were glad to see the other fellows that were there. The other, you know, yeah. And that's what you would do, you know. You'd see who was there from your group and so forth, you know, and so you could talk to each other and so forth. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you remember those who didn't come back?
Well, there was one when the hit by our bomb hit us. What was his name? Brown. Yeah. The bomb got him.
When did you get a chance to tell your family that you were okay after Pearl Harbor happened?
We could write a letter. We're all, you know, everybody do a letter, you know, and send it, you know. Yeah.
There were no cell phones back then, were there?
No.
How long before you actually talked to anybody in your family after that? Maybe on the phone call, or was it a long time?
When we got back to the States, you know, when we left then and got back to San Francisco, then we went over to the hotel over there. They had a big range of phones and everything to call up home, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember that conversation?
Not the conversations, but I remember being there later on. We got into Leyte Gulf, you know, the Philippines. Mm-hmm. 40 days and 40 nights in that place, and that's where they started the kamikazes. And the first kamikaze came across our bow and did not hit us. I was up on the not up on the signal, but up higher, you know, up on the where I was supposed to be. And this plane came right at that level, right where I was, you know, looking at it. So over our bow area. It didn't even try to go into us, just went by. Made us a little bit nervous there, but
I would have been a lot more than just nervous, I think.
But then we had a new destroyer over there, so it took that one, and she went down.
So you came close to being hit by a kamikaze at that point?
He may have been thinking, well, it's too big, I couldn't hurt it anyway, you know, it's too big, so it went after the destroyer.
When somebody calls you a hero, what goes through your mind?
I don't know if that's ever happened. I can't remember any of that type of saying, you know, to me.
Do you consider yourself a hero?
No, no. I was there. I wasn't forced there and so forth. I was there, and it happened.
But you could have died that day.
Yes, could have died, yeah. Yeah. I didn't think much like that, I guess, back then. I think, well, you know, you're young, and you feel like nothing can bother you, you know, when you're young. That was the feeling, you know. Some of the other ships had much, much worse, you know. It was terrible.
I appreciate your service. I appreciate you sitting down and talking to us today. And again, I consider you a hero for your service and for surviving that day, because many people did not.
That's true, yeah.
I want to thank Bud Hollenbeck for sitting down for this week's podcast interview. If you'd like to hear more of his stories about surviving Pearl Harbor, Bud is going to attend the Pearl Harbor commemoration ceremony here in the city. It's scheduled for Saturday, December the 7th at the Hannah Block Historic USO Community Arts Center at 2nd and Orange Streets downtown. It will start at 1:25 in the afternoon, and it's sponsored by the World War II Wilmington Homefront Heritage Coalition. Now, before we go, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please download and subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast on whatever app that you use to enjoy your favorite programs. And if you would be so kind, please leave us a rating or a review. We really do want to know what you think of the interviews we do. And the more ratings and reviews we get, the higher we'll be listed on the apps, and the better chance we'll have of bringing in even more new listeners. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of One-on-One.